Welcome everyone to Indiana University. This topic is very near and dear to my heart. So in addition to the hat I wear here on campus, I want to mention one other hat that's specifically relevant here. And that is, I'm on the leadership team and a co-PI with the National Science Foundation funded alliance that's 23 states and growing. And it's called Expanding Computing Education Pathways. And what we do with this alliance is we focus with state teams on keeping front and center this concept of broadening participation at a time when computing education, computer science education, and makerspace education is growing, and the technical stuff is new to the teachers too. So how can we keep, as I said, front and center this concept of representation and increasing underrepresentation? No, decreasing underrepresentation. Very important difference. Yes. Okay, so we're engaged in reform. We're engaged as change agents, and I would like to challenge you to be thinking about yourselves as each one of you being part of this movement. You are change agents. You are part of this reform. You are the influencers in your classrooms. And so as you listen to this amazing panel today that has great resources, great ideas, and sharing some challenges they have, please think of one or two takeaways that you can take with you as a to-do action item. When you go through the week, you can learn more about this, or you can take it back home to your classrooms or to your situations and do it to help make a difference. So let's get going here. So I'm going to start with Tony and ask for you, we'll learn a little bit more about their stories and their backgrounds here with this question is, what do the terms diversity and inclusion mean to you, both personally and within your organization, and how does it relate to CS for All?
I think when you told me this during the call that we did, I said it's like when I was asked what love is. And it's a pretty broad question to answer, but I think it's various perspectives, and that's why I think it's so important what Shireen is doing and others are doing, to get those perspectives from your constituents and really have them weigh in on it. The first is teachers, and really understand what their needs are in the classrooms in order to be able to facilitate what we're trying to do. But the others are, for instance, for a lot of Latino students that we work with, it's a language can be a barrier. And beyond language, it's also other barriers that won't allow that inclusivity, which are cultural relevancy. And then there's differences between the Latino community is not a homogenous community. A Salvadoran from Washington, D.C. is very different than a Salvadoran from L.A. or from Boston. A Cuban from New Jersey is very different than a Cuban student that's from Miami. And I think that those are also nuances within the community. What I'm proud of is with Infosys Foundation USA, we're actually going to be teaching computer programming in Spanish. And I think it's, down here, it's 70 million K through 12 students globally are Spanish dominant, and as well as 3.8 million here in the United States. So I'm very proud of being able to reach this community in a culturally relevant way. Part of that is who teaches the classes, and we were talking in the green room about that. We try to have a 19 or 20-year-old young woman, college student who's a CS major, being the ones to instruct the classes for 12-year-old or 10-year-old Latina girls. I really appreciate that they're 70-year-old retired engineers that are male that want to help. But for us, that's another relevancy. And I learned a very big lesson from a young woman where we had a panel discussion and we had Latinos on it, but there were no Latino women. And they said, I am going to relate to a woman of any kind, Asian, African American, from the Middle East, any woman more than I will any man. And that was a big lesson to us. So there's also those gender differences as well.
Thank you. How did you define love? No, you don't have to go there.
I hug my wife and my children.
Okay, Shireen, I want to say a little bit about your work and how you define diversity and inclusion.
I think I'm just going to dive in when we talk about inclusion, because let's just be real about what kind of data we have. So here in the state of Indiana, for example, booming economy, we have historical lows with unemployment that hovers about 3%. So you want to guess what the unemployment rate is for people with disabilities here in the state? 70%. That's out of the Governor's Council for Disabilities. That's their data here. So imagine that you have 30 million people here in the US that have on some spectrum of hearing loss, right? Because deafness isn't just mute deaf. Mute is not deafness. Deafness is this entire gigantic range of individuals. There's only about, 15% of deaf children are actually in deaf programs, which then means what? That the majority of our kids are in classrooms like yours, right? So what does that mean? That means that you have to be the jack of all trades. But there are solutions for that, right? Because you're not a deaf educator, you're not specific, you came out of your university and your degree programs, and nobody told you about universal design, nobody, and certainly you're not being measured as an educator about how you can be flexible, right? We've got like this very rigid system of measuring ability through standardized testing, which has single-handedly killed your ability to capture the magic of our kids. Everybody is suppressed in this system. So my philosophy is then what? Is that what do we measure in terms of a success? Well, I measure success that I don't care if Aisha, maximizes her reading ability beyond 5th grade. I don't care about that. What I care about is that if Aisha can be a badass programmer, master Python, and make $60,000 a year, then I think you as an educator should also share that bar with me. Who cares? And if you look at the paradigm of workforce development, everybody is discussing this. You talk to tech companies, what do they say? They say that the 4-year degree option is not the only doggone path. So why are we just put on this very narrow, very one-dimensional pathway of looking at, who gets to contribute to society? Who made these rules? See, I told you they would agree with me because I work in the classrooms. All my work is in classrooms all across the country. So I'm with you guys. I spend most of my time with you. And, and I can say this because I'm not accountable to anybody. You can't, but I'll say it for you. Oh, don't get me started. You know what the problem is when we talk about inclusion? If we're talking about the landscape, right? The entire landscape, because my kids are not just with disabilities, they can be Latino, and they can be, female, and they can be gay. I mean, they can be all these things. So our kids are not just in silos. So when you think of disabilities, they're us, and they are you, and, and you are them. And if you, want to push it further, I mean, I think the US population has people with disabilities are over 60 million plus. And now with the aging population, that's going to even hit the roof even more. So it's not something that is, unrelatable to any of us. Okay, I don't want to go on. You can move on. We only have 10 minutes or something.
We could have a whole evening on this, right? Okay, Debbie, Girls
Okay,
Inc.
I'm not sure that I can top that, but I do have a different perspective. At my role at Girls Inc., I lead a team that works towards strategizing and to get technology into the hands of girls aged 5 through 18. And so our approach, and I think it's a good one for all, is to, when you think of diversity and inclusion, you think of, okay, we serve 41% black girls, 24% Latina girls, 23% white, 2% Asian, and 1% Native American. But we also know that last year, 86% of our 80 affiliates throughout US and Canada served LGBTQ girls. 81% serve girls who have an IEP, who use adaptive equipment, or who need accommodations to fully participate in our programming. And 78% of the girls served are are from immigrant families. So all of those, I mean, I think we need to remember that and broaden our thinking on really what diversity is, and making sure that our programming that we provide for them allows them to fully participate, whether that's in a different language, whether that's a physical adaptation we make for them. We need to be thinking about all of that. And what I'll say about teachers is you don't have time for all that. So I think that there's some resources available to you that you need to look into, and I think we're going to talk about that a little bit later on.
We're going to talk about that right now. All right. So there are two things that are the focus of this. One has to do with access. And for students, diverse students in the K through 8 system, how many people work in that arena? Okay, so you're going to have those students in your classrooms, but when you get to high school, the access is really a challenge because there might be one class in the high school, and who usually takes those classes? White boys. And so we're talking about how to diversify the access, how to increase the access, what other resources are there for people. But my question that I'm going to ask right now actually has to do with equity, and I have a quote. So this is from the K-12 Computer Science Framework, and it's on equity. And the quote is, "Equity is not just about whether classes are available, but also about how those classes are taught, how students are recruited, how the classroom culture supports diverse learnings and promotes retention." So my question to you is, first of all, how can educators create the most inclusive environments in their classes? And each of you will have a different perspective about that. But what advice do you have for teachers in here? And then we can talk about some resources after that. But first, this is important. Who wants to go first?
Trying to be polite so I didn't have to follow you, but I'll go first. Teachers already, we were just talking earlier about, I was working with a school that didn't have hand soap during flu season. Teachers have such a burden on them, and that's why the message that we had from Donors Choose was so important, because they're trying to provide some of those resources. What we were able to do is work with teachers and figure out a way that we can teach computer science in schools or communities where they didn't have them, rural areas like Salinas Valley or Rio Grande Valley. We did it in Omaha, Nebraska, and it's always interesting that there is a large grouping of, they're just kind of in one spot, but a Mexican population in Salt Lake City that we didn't discover until we got a call from a teacher that said, "We need your help here." A lot of the kids didn't speak any English, so my favorite anecdote about all of this is that we actually, when we take surveys, the students said it was easier to learn coding than it was to learn English. It's much more consistent. And it was fascinating because we actually dug in with the students, and they actually gave us examples as to what was confusing. Also have discovered a lot of different issues like what my kids have, which is dyslexia and ADHD. They have to go to a lab school. Well, a lot of people don't necessarily know how to go work the system in order to get that support. So we're able to also help with those families. We now are teaching 100,000 students around the country how to code. We have to get creative with it to take pressure off teachers. That's our biggest thing that we're trying to do. So one of the ways, for instance, is on the 27th, if anyone is from the Dallas area, Oak Cliff is a neighborhood in Dallas, and we're actually going to be teaching it in someone's backyard, that we gave funding to create a classroom in his backyard because, as you know better than anyone, students drop off 20% of what they learned at least over the summer. So we have a curriculum that's based on coding for that entire summer, and then it ramps up again for the entire year that we're doing in someone's backyard. The other thing I want to mention too that I know is difficult for teachers, because we work very closely with teachers, is access to technology. We're finding that it makes it exclusive for who has a better chance of being able to learn coding or even being able to be a content creator or be able to communicate. We did a survey that was a national survey where Latinos were most likely to say they couldn't finish their homework because they didn't have access to technology or Wi-Fi at home. And teachers in our survey said that Latino parents were most difficult to get a hold of, not because of language barriers, because they didn't have email at home. And this transfers into job opportunities as well. I always like to say that a 13-year-old can reach more people than Gandhi, Martin Luther King, and Cesar Chavez could with a laptop and Wi-Fi. And we have to provide that potential for impact. And that's one of the things that we have to be very bold and very creative in how we address these issues. We worked with one superintendent that was wiring buses to have access to technology and to Wi-Fi as kids were being driven home in rural areas where they could spend over an hour, like I did to get here from the airport, inside of a school bus as they get dropped off. So they're actually being able to do their homework and do other projects while they were heading home. So I think it's just a question of trying to be as creative as you can, but we have to take the pressure off the teachers and work with them.
Yes, I agree with you 100%. And I think to your points as well, we need to make it accessible and affordable. And so I'm going to jump ahead a little bit. One of the resources, though, that I want to suggest is that both Girls Inc. and Tech Point Foundation for Youth, which I sit on the board, we give grants. And we give grants not just for technology, but for Tech Point Foundation is all technology. And through our programming at Girls Inc., we've been able to whet the appetites of 50,000 girls in technology and computer sciences. And those programs are free. And they're free from, because we also come to you. That's the point too, is we need to go where you are. Like you said, Antonio, you go to a person's backyard. Now we don't go to people's backyards, but we do come to the classroom. There's summer programming at schools. We go into the communities. We build partnerships with local community leaders and with the community businesses and the schools.
So is this Tech Point Foundation or is this Girls Inc.?
This is actually both.
Okay.
Now, Tech Point Foundation is just in Indiana.
Right.
But the reach of Girls Inc. is Canada and the United States. I would also say another thing too, and this is a little bit to your point as well, you had mentioned the gender differences. I think it's really important that if you can staff your classrooms with volunteers of people that look like the kids you teach. They need to see someone that looks like them in leadership roles as role models, and yeah, definitely, very much.
For sure. Role models are monumental in lifelong impacts, so that goes without saying. In terms of like meaningful resources that you can look up now, you can Google Universal Classroom Design. University of Washington has an incredible resource about how you can make computer science accessible within your own classroom, and just basically, you know, universal design within the classroom practice, right? Because even if you have no students with disabilities, you may have a more oral learner, you may have a more visual learner, you may have a more hands-on learner. And what does it mean about, you know, the physical space that you're working in? So there's a wealth of resources that you could Google now and create a checklist and use your imagination of how you can create a more meaningful learning space, and even rethinking about your own approaches. Piggybacking off of, you know, access of technology, man. I mean, I've worked in schools that had first generation iPads, and I've worked in schools that had nothing. And so if you do have access to technology, a computer lab, or whatever you have within your capacity, our kids are also, you know, there is no equity. I mean, I have kids that have no technology when they go home as well. And so that meaningful experience in the classroom could be all that they have. And I'm a big proponent for interdisciplinary teaching. So I just did a PD with the Make Wonder company about how you can integrate you know, the Dash robots in teaching reading skills, how to identify a noun, how to do sentence structure, and all kinds of things. So there's, you know, there's ways of integrating 21st century skill sets within your own curriculum. You don't have to necessarily change, your social studies curriculum. Just think of creative ways of, put the robot on the mat and say, okay, program the robot to find this continent. I mean, you're killing all these birds with one stone, even if you don't have the capacity or ability to readjust your class schedule that can accommodate a specific, but it's a way of like at least planting these seeds from K through 12 onward. And so, yeah, go ahead.
Okay, you were telling me a story, and we have to quickly wrap up here, but you were telling me a story about a young woman who went to Purdue as a computer science and a math major, lasted 3 semesters. The culture was bad, there were unconscious bias, things were going on. She changed out of the major, and I'm wondering if you, in 30 seconds or less, have suggestions for how teachers can foster a climate where people feel like they belong in computing.
So
Underrepresented
the young
people.
lady she's talking about, I know. It's my daughter. My daughter was a computer science math major and ran for her life. And it was devastating to me because I evangelized computer science. So it was horrible. But she ended up going in technology, but just in a different realm. And she had offers from multiple companies. And the company that she signed with, she decided to go with because she was interviewed by women. And it turned out to be a delightful working environment. So I think that even, onward, I think that it really is the culture that you're stepping into. So, so maybe here, this, IU may have a much more welcoming and better established, value system and, keeping and retaining that. But I don't think that, any of us, have the ability to really, throw stones at corporations when they just do all the talking, but they don't walk the walk.
Okay, I think our time is up here. I'm so sorry it is because this is such an important topic. But just the challenge for you is I hope you've got some kind of seed that you can think about. How could you make your classrooms more welcoming and inclusive? How can you help with access? What are the tools? We've only touched the tip of the iceberg here with some of the tools that are available to you. And hopefully you'll get a lot more information about that this week while you're here. So please help me thank our wonderful panelists.